The session with a chapter called Power Sharing. Now, in this chapter, which is the first chapter in your civics book, we are going to discuss that why is it so important to share political power among different sections of the society. And in your NCERT books, the chapter starts with two stories. So, the first story is of Belgium and the second story is of Sri Lanka. Before I start the story, I want to give you a gist of these two stories. Let's start with both the case studies, Belgium and Sri Lanka. So, Belgium and Sri Lanka are both diverse nations in a way that they have people of not just one language, people speaking not just one language, but two or three different languages. Let's see how. So, talking about Belgium has 59% Dutch-speaking people, 49% French-speaking people and 1% German-speaking people. Now, this is about the entire country of the Belgium. But the case is very different in the capital city of Belgium, which is Brussels. In Brussels, there are 80% French-speaking people and 20% people are Dutch-speaking. So, you see that the case is reversed. In the country, overall, the Dutch-speaking people are at majority, but in the capital city, French-speaking people are in the majority. Now, this actually started a conflict in the Belgium in 1950s and 60s because majority felt that the French-speaking people who are otherwise in minority in the country are actually dominating, are actually richer than the Dutch people. Dutch people felt that they haven't gotten the benefits of the economic development that French people had been getting. So there was some conflict going on between the Dutch-speaking people and the French-speaking people. Now this is about Belgium. Now let's come back to our South Asian country called Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, we have to talk about two languages, Sinhala and Tamil. So Sinhala as a language, there were 74% people in Sri Lanka who spoke Sinhala and Tamil people were just 18%. In that 18% also children, there were two kinds of Tamil speaking people. One were the natives of Sri Lanka, basically जिनके forefathers भी Sri Lanka के थे. The other category was of Indian Sri Lankans whose forefathers had migrated to Sri Lanka for tea plantation as tea plantation workers. So there were two categories in Sri Lankan, in Tamils also, Sri Lankan and Indian origin Tamils. But the point is that Sinhala speaking people were in majority and most of the Sinhala speaking people were belonging to Buddhist religion, while the Tamil speakers were either Hindu or Muslim. So this is just an overall context of the diversity of these two nations called Brussels and Sri Lanka. Now we will see how power sharing and how the dynamics of power sharing change the face of these countries. So we'll start with, so in Sri Lanka emerged as an independent country in 1948 and we know we are talking about democracy. So they had a constitution and the leaders, since the Sinhala community was in majority in overall nation, even in political sphere, the Sinhala community was in majority. In parliament also they were in majority. Now children, majoritarianism happened in Sri Lanka. What is majoritarianism? In a democracy, we know that everybody should get equal representation. But majoritarianism is where political representation of the majority is more than the minority and their rights are secured better than the minority rights. So as a result, in Sri Lanka, the majoritarian measures started to come up, which were favoring the Sinhala community. For instance, in 1956, an act came in Sri Lanka which recognized only official language of Sri Lanka as Sinhala language. So, Tamil people felt that their language has been degraded. Now, another policies came which actually secured jobs in public sector, in government job and university positions for again Sinhala communities. So you see the majority community in Sri Lanka were ruling the economic and political sphere in Sri Lanka. A new constitution that had came into existence stipulated that the state shall protect and foster Buddhism. So now not only language was given preferences, Sinhala language was given a preference over the Tamil language, but also Buddhism was being preferred than Hinduism or Muslim or Islam or Christianity. So all of this was happening, and Tamil people in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan Tamil people were feeling alienated. They were feeling that their country, their constitution, their government is not taking their rights into consideration, and everything was happening. They were asking for, a separate state. They were asking for consideration to their language, but they were denied. Finally, the relationship between Sinhala and Tamil people were being restrained. And by 1980s, by 1980s, several political organizations united and they started asking for a Tamil Elam. Tamil Elam means Tamil state. So they started asking for a different states for themselves. This is how much they felt alienated, that they wanted a partition of Sri Lanka. But obviously they were denied. The distrust between the two communities, the Sinhala community and the Tamil community, kept on growing, and this led to a civil war. So the entire country was going through a civil war, and thousands of people from both the communities, Sinhala as well as Tamil people, lost their lives. So many families were asked to fly off from Sri Lanka. They were asked to, vacate Sri Lanka. People lost their life. Otherwise, Sri Lanka has been an economically prosperous country, but this civil war actually affected Sri Lanka's economy, political life, and even social life very, very adversely. Now, this was a case, Sri Lanka's case was a case in where power wasn't shared between the two communities that it should have been. Okay, so that led to a civil war. On the other hand, contrasting example that we have in our book is of Belgium. We know that Belgium also had Dutch-speaking people and French-speaking people. I already told you that French-speaking people were in majority in the capital, Brussels, while Dutch-speaking people were in majority in the overall nation. But in Belgium, the government was very smart. The government was very accommodating, very inclusive. So when in 1950s and in 1960s, conflict started happening between the Dutch-speaking and the French-speaking people, government realized that it has to take certain measures. So between 1970 to 1993, some 4 amendments were made in the constitution to accommodate the diversity of Belgium. Some of the important measures that were made are as follows. The first measure that was made was that Dutch and French-speaking leaders had equal share in the central government. So federalism we are talking about, there is a central government, there is a state government. In the center, where we know that Dutch people were in majority, Dutch people gave up their majoritarian attitude, and they recognized the rights of French people also, and we got an equal representation in the center government. In reciprocation, French people, agreed for equal representation in the state level, because in Brussels, in the capital city, French were in majority, but they also reciprocated the favor that Dutch people did to them, and they agreed for equal representation in Brussels. Second measure was that the power was given to the state governments also. So there were certain measures that only state government could take for their state. So the power was not concentrated in just the center. It was equally divided in the center and the state. There was also a third kind of government in Brussels, which is known as community government. Community government helped in avoiding civic strifes. How? So community government was a kind of government in which a particular language speaking people will only vote, and the role of this government was to take care of the cultural rights, social rights, political rights of that particular language. So you see, seems very complicated, I know, and seems very inclusive also, but all these measures helped Belgium in avoiding the conflict that there could have been between the Dutch-speaking people and the French-speaking people. Even when European Union was made, Brussels, because of its diversity, and inclusivity was chosen as the capital city of Belgium and also as the headquarters of European Union. So students, what we learned from Sri Lanka and the story of Belgium is that power sharing, refusing power sharing and doing power sharing can lead to different outcomes. So in Belgium, where the government was accommodating, and it realized that the unity of the country could only be secured if you share the power between the two communities, French and Dutch speaking, we got good results.